And we are live. Assalamu alaikum, peace to everyone who is watching us, joining us on Facebook Live, as well as YouTube and Twitter and Rumble. We want to welcome you to this special conversation with Imam Earl Abdulmalik Mohammed. I'm joined also by our other host, Faridah Brown. Before we get started, we want to make a couple of brief announcements with regard to this particular program. We do have a Q&A session. You'll have to join the Zoom if you would like to ask a question and raise your hand inside of the Zoom. The link for that is in the description of the Facebook link that you're watching, or YouTube. If you just hit more on Facebook, the menu will drop down and you can see the Zoom link, and you just press that and that will take you into the queue to ask a question. And then on YouTube, it's in the description of the video. This conversation is ahead of a public address that Imam Abdulmalik Mohammed will be giving in Detroit this Saturday at 1 p.m. at the International Institute of Metropolitan Detroit. The attendance is free and it's open to the public. And if you've been following us on Facebook, as well as some of our other social media platforms, I'm sure that you've seen the flyers and the announcements, as well as perhaps some of the ads that we've been running on Facebook. So we're looking forward to a very special program, and in the near future, additional visits to the city of Detroit. What we want to do is, we have obviously an audience that, or these platforms reach, quite a number of people, and some of them may not be Muslim, some of them may be, and also familiar with our particular community and its history, which began in the city of Detroit. So starting off, I would like to ask the Imam a question. The city of Detroit is the site of, or the place where Mr. Faridah chose to establish the first temple of Islam, commonly referred to as Temple Number 1. Do we have any indication about why he chose Detroit in the historical record, and what should we understand about his particular choice of that city?
Yes, thank you very much. Nothing that Mr. Faridah did was without importance and meaning, but it was left for interpretation. And I'm sure if we study his teaching carefully or closely, not necessarily the details in the language, but what he was aiming for or aiming at, and we use the ability to translate mythology into common language, we can appreciate much of what he said and taught, and we can appreciate the setting of Detroit, Michigan. Certainly the numbering of the original places of assembly, the temples, has significance, and Temple Number 1 is Detroit. Mr. Faridah was sensitive to the importance of these cities in the life of this society. And he was also obviously interested in the influence of these cities on the life of the Black people or African-American people. Detroit, we know, was a center, or still important economic center. It was the home for the automobile industry in the United States of America. And Mr. Farad took notice of that. That's important in the context of understanding his choice of Detroit. So there's much to be said about it. And we don't have really the time to go into all of it right now. But I think it's important, as you've already pointed out in the question, that these cities, these settings, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., the first 4 of the temples were not selected by chance, that he had specific interests. And it had much to do with the influence of and the authority of these cities in the life of the American people, and particularly in the lives of the African American people. It's also important to point out that Mr. Farad made it a point that he was not pursuing the educated African American or Black people who had been educated. He wasn't pursuing them. His message, though he wanted to free all Black people, he said he had 17 million keys. And at that time, that was the number that was associated with the population of African Americans, 17 million. But he made it a point to tell his student, Elijah Muhammad, that he was not to focus his attention on the educated, that he was to appeal to those who had been neglected, not just economically poor, but also poor in education, and particularly poor in education in reading or appreciating or understanding myth and the burden of myth in the life of Black people and America. Detroit has a lot to do with that.
Sister Faridah?
Yeah, so given that, so I hope that I can simplify this question as much as possible, but given that I guess the target for this messaging by Mr. Farad were those who were uneducated, those who were poor, the Southern migrants. Could you speak a little bit to the nature of the exoteric and the esoteric program that Mr. Farad brought to Detroit? You know, given that there had been programs that had come before him, like the United Negro Improvement Association with Garvey and the Moorish Science Temple. But what was unique about this kind of dual program that Mr. Farad had, and how did that speak to the psychology of this specific segment of our population that you just spoke to?
He was a student of the freedom interest in the African American leadership, and he borrowed from what he thought would be effective, useful components of what had proven successful in the strategies of other African American leaders. The use of military drill, for example, that he most likely borrowed from Booker T. Washington. And the attention on a kind of formal dress, even while being active in physical labor, also something that it is believed that he borrowed from Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee. He took from, obviously, Drew Ali, the original head head covering for the men in the Nation of Islam. There's a photograph, a well-known photograph, that shows Elijah Muhammad in the fez that the Moorish Science members of the Moorish Science Temple, that they wore. And I've heard the members of the Moorish Science Temple claim Elijah Muhammad as a member, but he himself said that he was never a member. But Mr. Farad obviously introduced that head dress into the Nation of Islam practice. And there are many, many examples of this. But as you said, he had attention or balance of both secretive things and things that were intended to get attention from the public. And the secretive things were in his lessons, in the teaching inside the temple. But the appeal to the dignity of Black people and references to a excellence in their past life, a past glory, was a very important magnetic appeal to the uneducated people of Detroit. And this was one of the things that attracted Clara, the wife of Elijah Muhammad, or Elijah Poole, and is told by Imam W.D. Muhammad that his mother had a friend who had invited her to attend the meeting, and the appeal in the teaching was that the Black people weren't always in this burdened condition, that they came from a past life of excellence and establishment and productivity and leadership and dignity and a kind of glory. And this was a great appeal. So this was attractive. And once people were drawn to that message and assembled themselves around Mr. Farad, he introduced some mystical ideas, new way of approaching the problem for Black people in America that had to do with focusing attention not on the white world and the power of the white world, but by focusing on the inherent greatness of the Black people and denying everything that had to do with the legitimacy of white authority. So the idea was to separate these people from the notion that they could not do anything except that the white people approved of it. And all manner of mystical teaching to support that idea, to eventually, and this is the most important matter, to eventually introduce to them and make comfortable for them Muslim identity. And also to make a way for an appreciation and embrace of the Quran as guidance, as the center of possibility for productive life for Black people in America. That was his plan, ultimately to introduce a way to appreciate the Quran as the center of guidance and the hope for establishment for Black people in America. And his strategy, though it had a lot of winding pathways and very difficult to understand reasoning and a lot of heavy symbolism, we can say, all of us sitting here today, that his strategy was successful.
Yes, indeed.
Our circumstances right now, the fact that we're having this interview right now is directly associated with Mr. Farad's strategy. If it were not for his strategy, we would not have this identity that we have. We might be Muslims, but we wouldn't have this mind that we have.
Indeed. So given you know, that what you just said about having a unique mind that was brought part of a strategy that brought us to the Quran. There was something that Imam Muhammad said in his 2000 address, the Savior's Day address, and in reference to our development as a people. He said, and I quote, "The journey has encountered long periods of suffering and short periods of relief, with some measure of progress." And he shared the Quranic insight that there can be nothing for humanity without an enduring effort, and its striving will reach its manifest destiny. How can this understanding help us to address our frustrated community spirit as you know, on the eve of you entering Detroit and addressing the community there?
You know, I have been reflecting on the burden that's placed on our people because of the inability of our leaders to cooperate with one another. And I'm thinking of it in the context of a family. We're a family. I know that Imam W.D. Muhammad referred to me as son. I was son-in-law to him. But he didn't call me son-in-law, he called me son. To me, personally, and also in public. I wasn't the only one he referred to like that. I don't want to name anyone, I don't want to name any particular person, but I know that he thought of others in the leadership of the community, similar, in a similar way, or he thought of them as his sons. I don't attach to that anything other than what he intended, and that is that we are linked together. Our soul is linked together. Our soul is one. And the Quran invites us and sensitizes us and focuses us on the rights of the dignity of family. And when we think of families, we can see trouble, we can see discord often, conflict, frustration. But even in spite of those things, we see a spirit to be together, a spirit of continuity, and a spirit to strive and struggle through the difficulties, and a vision for peace and tranquility. And all of what I just described is in our ritual life as Muslims. If we look at our prayers, for example, our prayers, the ritual prayer that we have called Salat, is, if anything, a public discussion on the dignity of man, the dignity of the human family, the rise and fall of civilization. And really, it's the story of a family. And our whole life is focused on building and strengthening the relationships between that are necessary to maintain and to sustain and to protect human worth and the values that are associated with human worth. And those values are taught, and they are understood best in family settings with the family spirit. So I have to accept some responsibility for perhaps contributing to a spirit of discord. I have to accept some responsibility for it. I didn't intend that. I've never intended that. But I can see where things that I have said can put someone off and make them feel like I'm promoting or advocating something that's not in the good spirit of our life of progress. That hasn't been my intention at all. But I can see how it can be interpreted that way. What I will say is this. Within the family, there are trusted members who advance the best interests of the family. And those individuals, because of how they are moved spiritually, not necessarily how much knowledge they have, but how they are moved spiritually, meaning their devotion is to the integrity and strength of the family. They can be trusted to invite people with knowledge in the family. They can be trusted to invite the best circumstances to feed what is necessary to strengthen the family. And I believe that, like Moses commissioned or appointed Joshua, which, if you understand the spiritual sciences of religion and the Bible, and even in the Quran, because there's discussion in the Quran too, that in that way, that Moses saw that the way to preserve and protect the life form of the community that was to be identified as the community of faith and obedience to God, in order to establish the principles that were necessary to govern the life and progress that life, that it had to be moved along in spirit. That if the spirit were correct, that the necessary components would be attracted like a magnet to strengthen the life. And that is symbolized in Joshua. And I believe that that's how Imam W.D. Muhammad saw me. He saw me as someone who would preserve and work for extending the spirit of his leadership. And I believe that if no matter what the criticisms are, and also any shortcomings that have been displayed from me personally, it is said and it is appreciated, even by people who would consider themselves to be adversaries of mine, that this man carries Imam W.D. Muhammad's spirit. And even if they don't join us or join me, they are moved to appreciate his teaching in our life and the importance of his teaching for establishing our life. And if that's the case, then the movement of the spirit has attracted that. And that's what we want, and that's what the Imam intended. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir. We were earlier in the conversation, we were discussing Mr. Farad, and a question came to my mind. And if you, I guess you could say there is, I've noticed somewhat of an increased interest in him. There was a song that came out that was named after him recently. I forget who was the main artist, but the rap artist Busta Rhymes was featured on it, and kind of an increased interest in him and the Nation of Islam on the part of the African-American family, if you will. what is it that perhaps they're missing in terms of understanding Mr. Farad, understanding his intent? Because while in some cases there's a reverence displayed, it seems to me that there is the appreciation is not as complete as it should be.
I heard someone say recently, I'm just going to tell you who it was, Siraj Wahaj. And I'm sure he'll get this. And I heard him say this, that he was an expert on the Nation of Islam. And he said that he was an expert on the Nation of Islam because he was a minister in the Nation of Islam. That made him an expert. Imam W. Muhammad, he told me, he said, you knew my father better than most of his ministers. That's what he told me. I would never say that I'm an expert on the Nation of Islam. I would never say that. But here is the son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the person designated leader, understood to be leader, and who had been influenced by Mr. Farad's teaching. Mr. Farad's teaching was responsible for creating the possibilities for Wallace D. Muhammad or Imam W. D. Muhammad. Here he is telling me that I knew his father better than most of his ministers. Meaning what? Meaning that the moral interest, the moral aim, not so much the details of the language of the Nation of Islam, the weight of and the importance and the special nature of its influence on our life was not in the details. It was in the aim. It was in the aim of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It was in the aim of Mr. Farad. And as I said in answering Sister Faridah's question, to have a free mind and to separate from the command of white authority. In other words, that the Black people have their own mind with regard to how they should establish themselves, and that they never give their soul to America, that they give their soul to God, and they be a factor for improving the social environment of America, or in improving the lives of human beings in general, but that they always be independent, autonomous in their human spirit. That's the influence of Mr. Farad. And we don't know of him as we know of him through the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's leadership. That's how we know Mr. Farad. That's how we see Mr. Farad. And if you're looking at the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and what you're coming away with is some dogmatic doctrinization or calling white people devils or something of this nature, and you're not seeing the moral aim that made a way for appreciation for our dignity as human beings, that we stand as a community alongside all other communities of human beings on this earth, and that we credit the God that created us in the context of, in the way that God created humans and the possibilities for human progress, as it is explained or as it is taught or as it is presented in Islamic teaching. No person in America, no Muslim in America of African descent can honestly say that the appreciation that they have for Islamic identity and the devotion that they have to Islamic identity and the opportunities that they have to build Islamic life are not in some way attributable to the influence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Mr. W.D. Farad. And what does that mean? What does Islam mean to human civilization? If you ask that question and you ask it honestly and you pursue an honest answer, you recognize that Islam means a great deal to human civilization on this earth. Therefore, the conditions that produced a possibility for Islamic life in America, where that points to, is also of great value. That's the influence of Mr. W.D. Farad.
We just have a few moments left in the time that we have set aside for our conversation here with Imam Earl Abdulmalik Mohammed. If you do have a question, you can go ahead and log into the Zoom at this point and raise your hand. The topic that you selected for your address this Saturday, freedom and slavery in the modern world, a major concern for the regardful of God. If you could you give us some explanation as to why you chose this particular topic under these particular circumstances, visiting the city of Detroit?
Well, yes. Let me say it this way. Freedom is not just an interest of the politicians. It's not just a political idea. There's sacred matter, a sacred component, and a sacred space that from which the true meaning of freedom evolves. Sacred space. And it begins with the proper regard for God, and it begins with the proper form that human life should be in, at least in terms of our intellectual interests and our moral interests. And that is real freedom that eventually leads to a just society and to, in the common language of people, because Muslims who are enlightened, if we are following in the direction of Muhammad the Prophet, it should be our interest to want to translate high ideas into the language of the common people. So the movement from freedom to justice eventually gets to equality, and that's the language of the common people. The common people understand what it means to be equal. They understand what it means to be balanced. That's where we want to go. The equitable society. I don't want to confuse anyone, but in the spiritual sciences, in the spiritual sense, freedom in this world, according to, or by way of the influence of the enemy of man, is slavery. And slavery, in the true sense that God created obedience, is freedom. When you obeying the form and the processes that God intended for you to have, you have disciplined yourself, and you don't have any notion that you will disobey your master, who is God. So if we describe a master-slave relationship as slavery, and we understand that the term that means worship and obedience is related to a term that was corrupted by the Arabs, that they translated or used to justify their relationship or to justify their authority over their servants, God dignified that term and made it his term. So obedience to God is a form of slavery, but it is a slavery that does not cheat or crush your human dignity, that it elevates you. And it's the highest, most sacred, most special, most important human identity, to be the slave of God.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much. So given that role of, moving forward the equitable society and building that, we know that Detroit in 1930 was a microcosm of the African-American experience in this country. And we know that Imam Mohammed has also told us that our migration up north from the South should be seen as a migration for the establishment of African-American community life. So for those of us who have submitted ourselves to God, to the Creator, and are formulating our lives along those lines in obedience, what is our role and the role of this community as Muslim African Americans? What is our role in that establishment of African American community life?
Well, it's many things. It's many things. But what we hope, what we aim for, is to be a model of excellence, a model of excellence in every necessary discipline to support an independent, autonomous community existence that will be prepared for the American people to rely upon for leadership. When we become the community that, when America loses its way to pursue its core principles, that it look to us, then we have achieved that. We're not yet there, but we're on the path. And America is in big trouble. And it's looking, its soul is searching for new leadership. And all manner of ideas are competing for that. But we have been prepared for that. And when we step into that role in terms of what we have produced as a model of excellence, social excellence, and become a trusted entity, we will have achieved and fulfilled our purpose as a community. That should be our aim. Not to convert everyone to Islam, not to do away with Christianity or Judaism or any other religion, but to preserve the principles that guarantee the rights of all of those peoples of faith to practice their faith, not under the authority of Islamic law in the way that we see Islamic law in other places in the world, but under the authority of a free moral conscience that recognizes that there's one God who created everything and one system governing everything that God has created, and he has made it such that it is accessible to any common, decent intellect to engage and to progress. A society that guarantees that engagement and that access is the true Islamic society.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Yes.
So now I got a nice watch on and it says it's time to go.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brother Imam. So again, we want to thank you all who are watching for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at the public address this Saturday, again, May 20th, 1 p.m. at the International Institute of Metropolitan Detroit. You can go to EAM Speaks or MuslimAmericanMinistry.com for further details. also on our Facebook pages. Also, too, our third annual 4th of July or Independence Day address is coming up July 2nd in Rochester, New York, which was the home of Frederick Douglass. We've been there now a couple of years in a row, and we're looking forward to an even bigger and even more successful program at the beginning of July. So the advertisements and the announcements will be up for that as well. Also, too, the Imam conducts an Islamic studies class every Sunday. I'm sure many of you who are watching may be familiar with Imam Dahan. So if you go over to his page, you'll likely see quite a bit of information on the Islamic studies class and how to register for that. If you're interested, it's free, and we welcome you. Again, thank you, Brother Imam. Thank you, Sister Faridah. And we look forward to seeing you all in a couple of days. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.